Boruto's death has been hinted at so many times in this manga. At this point it seems to be inevitable. Whether it's Kashin Koji's visions from the future, Momoshiki's Blue Eyes prophecy, and even subtle foreshadowing in the early stages of the manga. This of course then begs the question, will this event come to pass? And the truth is that we have no idea. Now this might seem far-fetched, but given the frequency of which this appears in the story, of which I have 14 of them listed in this video, I do think it's a very strong possibility. Now the first dead flag we got for Boruto was in chapter 700 of Naruto's manga. This started with Boruto deciding to paint across the Hokage faces in an effort to get some attention from his father Naruto, which of course was very successful. Naruto then grabbed him and slammed his fist into the top of his head. This then left him dangling from the rope he had wrapped around him, which from this point of view made it seem as if he offed himself. Now obviously this is more so meant to be a funny gesture, but given the theme of sacrifice surrounding Boruto's character, it could also be seen as a bit of foreshadowing. Now the second death flag came in chapter 1 of Boruto's own manga. This came in the form of Kawaki telling him that he'll send him where he sent the 7th Hokage, which of course would be Naruto. That to atop a destroyed Hokage monument which stood above a destroyed Leaf Village. This led many to believe that Naruto himself was no longer among the living, which would then mean that where Kawaki wants to send Boruto is a place called the afterlife. Now of course this wasn't the case since the place was Ishiki's dimension where time doesn't flow. Even so, I will still count it as a dead flag due to its implications prior to the knowledge of what really happened. Now as for the third one, this came in chapter 10 of part 1 in the form of Momoshiki's prophecy. So moments after Boruto destroyed him with the combined help of Sasuke and Naruto's chakra, Momoshiki came to him in the form of a spirit. He goes on to say that he wasn't able to see his own fate even with all his powers and the Byakugan, but he could see Boruto's fate quite well, which is funny given the events later on in the manga. But he does go on to say that those blue eyes shall eventually take everything from you, so reflect upon thy fate as you walk it, human child. By the way, this was followed up in chapter 10 as well, when Sarada noted that Boruto's eyes are even bluer than Lord Seven's. This then of course reminded Boruto of said prophecy about some blue eyes taking everything from him. So in essence, Boruto's fate is to lose everything, which would also include his own life, thus why it's considered a dead flag. Now the fourth dead flag came in chapter 25, where we later found out that Kawaki was the vessel Kara was looking for. Now this by itself isn't a dead flag per se, but given the surrounding circumstances such as Kawaki possessing a mark similar to that of Boruto's, which he received from Momoshiki, it does imply that there's some connection there. The obvious assumption was that Kawaki also received his mark from such an entity, which is likely why he's a vessel. So if this is why Kawaki is a vessel, it would also make Boruto a vessel as well. And typically a person being a vessel in most cases means that their body is being used to bring someone else back to life, which results in the death of that person. So if you were following the Boruto manga back then, this was the most popular conclusion people arrived at. By the way, this was later backed up in chapter 34 after Delta told Jigen that Boruto also possessed a karma seal. Jigen then smirked and said, "What unforeseen news? Momoshiki, you sly fox. You did manage to leave behind a vessel as you died." Now the fifth death flag came in chapter 43 called Manifestation, when Momoshiki of course manifested. This came after Boruto went crazy and pretty much destroyed Team 7. Momoshiki had no choice but to step in and protect his vessel from certain death, which resulted in his manifestation. He then went on to destroy Boruto with a massive Rasengan, which showed how much of a threat the karma truly was. He also recited the prophecy once again, saying, "Not yet, my dear blue-eyed boy. It's still a ways away that you'll go on to lose it all." Now this is when I think most people understood what the prophecy meant, or at least a part of it, and how it relates to the karma. Momoshiki has the power to take control of Boruto's body, which supplemented the idea that Boruto being his vessel likely means that Momoshiki hopes to return through his body, which also likely results in Boruto's death. This was also later somewhat confirmed in the following chapter when Mitsuki informed Sasuke of what took place. Sasuke then goes on to say that he was suspicious about Momoshiki's motives for granting Boruto such power, but it makes sense if it allows him to resurrect himself. Now the sixth one came in chapter 47 when Amado explained what a karma seal is. Now this also isn't the only death flag in this chapter, since Amado also goes on to say that they could prevent Momoshiki's rebirth if they killed Boruto before the extraction completes. And given the current situation with Boruto and Momoshiki, this might be relevant even today. Now the 7th one came in chapter 48 when Boruto wanted to assist in the fight against Ishiki. Naruto of course says no, and Sasuke follows up by saying that he's willing to die at any moment for Konoha. He then asks Boruto, what about you? Could you die for the village? This is then followed up in chapter 49 where Boruto says that what he's worried about is his body being taken over by Momoshiki and what he might do to everyone. Sasuke then says that even if Momoshiki happens to take over your consciousness, don't worry. I swear to stop you with all my strength, even if I have to kill you. So, two things. Boruto is questioned about whether he's truly ready to die for the sake of the village, which in one way could be interpreted as facing off against Ishiki and dying in battle. The next interpretation would be that if Boruto is willing to give up his life to solve the Momoshiki situation if it truly comes to it. Then you have Sasuke of course promising to kill him himself if he has to. Both of these death flags are still relevant in Blue Vortex since the possibility of Momoshiki possessing him still lingers. Now the 8th death flag came in chapter 50 when Boruto realized that Ishiki hesitated to stab him. He then recalled the convo between himself and Boro where it implied that they needed Boruto alive for some plan. It's then later revealed that Ishiki plans on feeding Boruto to the Ten Tails since it needs a living Otsutsuki to evolve into a divine tree. Boruto hearing this threatens to off himself to prevent this from happening. He even tried to do it but Ishiki stops him by shrinking his kunai. This shows that Boruto was willing to sacrifice himself for the good of the world, which goes back to Sasuke's question in chapter 48. This will of his is still relevant in Blue Vortex and might play an important role in later plotlines. Oh, speaking of later plotlines, this played out in chapter 65 when Momoshiki possessed his body once again. This time he planned on taking Naruto's life and feeding Kawaki to the Ten Tails to cultivate his own divine tree. Kawaki of course wasn't having any of this and they pretty much battled to a standstill. Boruto then started to regain some consciousness or some level of it and some control over his body as well. Though this time it seemed as if this was temporary since Boruto tells Kawaki to do it while his mind is still holding Momoshiki at bay. He then allowed Kawaki to end his life by running his hand through his chest, which then of course fulfilled his promise to protect the village even at the expense of his own life. Now the 9th flag came in chapter 67 after Boruto was revived by Momoshiki. He goes on to question Momoshiki about whether this is what he meant by take everything from you. Momoshiki then laughs and says this has nothing to do with that, and why that will come to pass even I cannot see, but it will be soon, the time draws near. It shall be a true spectacle, young lad. Now this is important to consider since Momoshiki notes that since he revived Boruto using his data, he can no longer resurrect within his body. So if Boruto is no longer dying in that sense, how exactly would he lose everything? But this was hinted at in chapter 72 when Momoshiki tells Boruto that it is irresponsible of him to tell his mom that he would be coming home. He goes on to say that I told you that you were going to lose everything, and that moment is rapidly approaching. You shall despair, lose your will to live, enough to want to escape this world. And when that day comes, I shall take over and live Uzumaki Boruto's life for you. All you need to do is just cower quietly in a corner of your psyche for eternity. So in a sense, this means that Boruto would no longer exist and Momoshiki would assume his person, thus also being a death flag. This is also relevant in Blue Vortex given Momoshiki's silence for the last 2 years, but we'll get to that part in a bit. Now the 10th flag would be the visions Boruto saw in chapter 75. First one showed him a future where he's been hunted by Team 10 and the Leaf Jonin. Next was an image of Sarada and Mitsuki seemingly hunting him as well. Then the final one was a part of Kawaki seemingly looking down at him with blood splattered on his face. This implied that he was somehow the enemy of the village and later got killed by Kawaki once again. This then culminated in the events of chapter 78 when Kawaki told Naruto that he was going to kill Boruto, which then led into their battle atop the Akage monument, Momoshiki reciting his prophecy once again, and then of course Omnipotence switching the lives of Boruto and Kawaki. And since Kawaki made it seem as if he killed the 7th, Boruto is now wanted for murder. Part 1 ends with Boruto leaving the village as a rogue ninja with the world as his enemy, along with Code who now thinks he's Kawaki wanting to kill him. Now the 11th death flag came in chapter 3 of Blue Vortex. After Boruto defeated Code by himself and Kawaki interfered which allowed him to escape, he then says to Boruto that if you've come to die at home, I'll help you, right here, right now. Boruto then says that dying in Konoha doesn't sound bad, but not today. Now this does seem a bit tongue-in-cheek, but given what we learned later on in chapter 13, there might be more to it. As for the 12th death flag, this appeared in chapter 4 after the 10 tails evolved into the Shinju. They then reveal that they want to devour Boruto since that's what they need to produce a chakra fruit. Now Boruto did escape of course because Jura wasn't ready to do that just yet, but he does go on to say that Boruto can run where he wants to, but no matter where he goes, he can't escape his destiny. Now the 13th death flag came in chapter 13 of 2 Blue Vortex. This was in the form of Kashin Koji, revealing that through his ability to see infinite possible futures, he knows what may or may not happen. One of those things being Boruto's death at the hands of Jura, which many futures show happening. This means that Boruto's death is actually canon, at least in one of the many futures that may or may not happen. Now the 14th flag came in chapter 15. After Boruto escapes his interrogation, he meets Kawaki atop the Akage monument. Kawaki then questions him about the Momoshiki situation, which is when he said something quite interesting. He goes on to say that about 2 years ago, when my teacher and I fought code together, I used my karma seal for the first time since I'd left the village. That is when I sensed it. Something similar to the feeling I got whenever Momoshiki possessed me. A feeling where I stopped being myself and started dying while still conscious and aware. Since then, I haven't used my karma even once. This implies that Boruto isn't just at risk of Momoshiki possessing him temporarily. It's almost as if a fusion process is taking place where they're becoming one entity. If this does happen, it would be akin to dying since Boruto as a person would no longer exist, which is why it's considered a dead flag. Now the final flag came in chapter 17 when Boruto questioned Koji about the possibility of his friends losing their fight with the Shinju. Koji then tells him that the possibility of them winning is not high, but he also can't help them. He then goes on to say that just like with Himawari leaving the village, if you take part in this battle, Jura will make a move, and if that happens, you will die this time. So this means that Boruto can't help his friends because the possibility of Jura ending his life is way too high, thus also being a dead flag. With that said guys, that is it for the video. If I missed anything, let me know in the comment section. And also, this doesn't by any means mean that Boruto is definitely going to die. These are just dead flags that hints towards that possibility. This could all be red herrings and not amount to anything. So just keep that in mind. So again guys, with that said, I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out.